So we're going to talk about AngularJS and Rails. So this is kind of an adjunct to what Nick went over with Angular. I'm not actually going to talk too much about Angular itself. Nick did a great job about that. But what he showed is creating two separate apps. One that's kind of a static app that uses cores to talk to another app that's going to provide your API. So I'm going to talk about what if you're used to Rails and you want to use Angular, and what do you have to do to your Rails application in order to make it Angular friendly. So first thing is you can definitely use Rails as your API, and I recommend using active model serializers in order to make it compatible with Angular and make everything super happy. Create an initializer for your active model serializers that basically sets a couple of options to false so that it doesn't include your roots in there by default. And then what I like to do is I make a thing that I call bridge serializer. You can call it whatever you want, that subclasses active model serializer. But what it does is if there's any errors on your object, it'll automatically just slap them into the JSON for you. And so that way, I can always just return the serialized version of my object. If there's errors on there, great, they'll be there. If there's not, then there won't be any. So it only does that if there's actually any errors on there. And so then I can have my user serializer or any other kind of serializer I create subclass from that bridge serializer, and I can treat it just like any other active model serializer. You can read more about the active model serializer gem if you want to look into using that, but it just gives you a nice way to find out how to create your JSON versions of your objects. You can use Rails as your template server, which is one of the things that I like doing because I don't like writing HTML. HTML is horrible. There's other options that are better out there. I like Slim. And so I like to write all of my templates and all of my things in Slim. But by having Rails as my template server, I can just let the Rails capabilities of just automatically compile my templates down from Slim into HTML. So there's a couple of things that I do to set it up as a template server. There's some routes. I decided to go with a controller called Pages. You can call it whatever you want. Pages index is just going to be my application. It's going to serve up a basically blank template file that has a root Angular node on there. And then the templates are all served up using Pages show. So what I did here is I basically said, when you get pages, and anything after the pages slash, it's going to just glob that into a variable called ID. And it's going to use the pages show. And then in order to make HTML5 magic work, at the very end of my routes file, I say, hey, if you hear about anything that you don't know, just go to the index page. And then that way, that'll let Angular handle everything as far as the HTML5 history. So what did my pages controller look like? Right there, the index doesn't do anything. And the show basically just takes that ID parameter and sticks it in a variable called path, and it renders without a layout. And this is what my actual files look like. Index is empty, and show just renders a partial that happens to be whatever's in my path variable. And so this lets me create all of my templates for Angular as Rails partials. And you can use whatever directory structure you want to structure those in, and it'll just render that partial as whatever template is asked for. Also, Slim uses curly braces as delimiters by default, so you can turn that off. And by default, it actually uses parentheses, square brackets, or curly braces. But what you can do is change it and say, hey, I only want you to use as delimiters parentheses and square brackets. And so you just leave out the curly braces. And then that way you can do your curly brace Angular references for your templating. Your asset pipeline, you can pretty much just use it as normal. You can either include Angular as part of your JavaScript.js, or you can use a Google CDN if you want to just pull it down from Google, which is a great way to do it. Ideally, you would use the format where you specify your inputs to your functions using a string. And if you do it this way, then you don't need to do anything else. The asset pipeline will work just fine. Everything will be just as you would expect. But if you have any doubts or if you run into any problems, if you add this little line into production.rb, you can turn off the mangling of the JavaScript. And so it'll leave all your names exactly the same. Your files won't be quite as minimized, but they'll work. I highly recommend you actually follow the recommended Angular format, though, of using the string definition there. Testing. There's a gem called Teaspoon, and there's a guard plugin for it as well. And I'm going to let you actually go look at the instructions for how to set it up. It just has a couple of little initialized rate tasks that will get you set up on it. But once it's set up, it's built into all of your standard Rails testing, and it'll just run all of your tests using Jasmine and Phantom.js. And so you can just include a JavaScript section in your test just right next to all of your other Rails tests for testing your API and any unit tests you've got. And there's not a whole lot to it as far as the setup. You just have to run a couple of initialization routines, and that'll just work for you. And final notes, remove turbo links. You don't need it. You're building a single page application, and just rip turbo links out. You don't need it or want it, and it's just going to cause headaches. I saw a couple of things out there where people are trying to make it fit in there for some reason. I don't know why you would want to do that. Just let Angular do its thing. And that's about it. Any questions that anyone has? I've got a couple minutes still.
Do you find yourself using embedded Ruby in your views?
No, I don't really. I mean, I mainly am using it as a template engine so that I don't have to write HTML. There's other ways that I could use Slim and compile it down using some other processor and still get the same effect, but I'm building the API in Rails. I might as well just let Rails do the templates too. But no, I don't put logic in the templates. I don't put actual Ruby in there. You could. You can definitely, if you have include images in your templates, like feel free to use image tag, and feel free to use anything else. If you do anything, and even if you don't, you should probably wrap the whole thing in a cache, because there's no point to keep spending time processing and re-rendering that Slim, especially when it's not actually adding any value. So it doesn't cost much of anything to toss a little cache line on all of your templates, and they'll just all be cached. Anything else?